New this morning, the Boeing strike officially over. Striking workers voting yesterday to accept the company's most recent offer.
The International Association of Machinists said rank and file members voted by 59% to approve the deal.
The deal includes an immediate raise of 13% and then raises of 9% for each of the next 2 years, and then another 7% raise in the fourth and final year of that contract. Altogether, members will receive a pay raise of more than 43% over that amount of time.
Workers also get a ratification bonus of about $12 grand, but the deal did not restore the traditional pension plan they lost in 2014 from their previous labor deal.
Vice President Harris says momentum is on her side coming into today, Election Day. She was out on the campaign trail at the 11th hour last night, stumping for votes in the must-win state of Pennsylvania, rallying voters in Pittsburgh in the shadow of a 92-foot-tall blast furnace. It's a relic of the steel industry.
In her second-to-last rally of the day, saying it's time for a new generation of leadership in America, and delivering her final argument without mentioning her opponent's name.
Instead of stewing over an enemy's list, I will spend every day working on my to-do list, full of priorities to improve your life, because ours is not a fight against something, it is a fight for something.
Harris then capped off her day with a late-night rally in Philadelphia.
Former President Donald Trump was also in Philadelphia last night, where he took the stage PPG Paints Arena, the home of the Pittsburgh Penguins. He brought his adult children on stage to recognize them in his second-to-last rally of his campaign and delivered his final message to supporters.
Trump also reflecting on his many rallies throughout the campaign season, hammering home his pledge to bring change at the border, calling today Liberation Day in America.
November 5th, 2024 will be Liberation Day in America. Think of it, we're an occupied country, but it will soon be an occupied country no longer. It's not going to be an occupied country.
The former president wrapped up his campaign in Grand Rapids, Michigan last night, the same location he held his final rallies in 2016 and 2020.
The presidential election being watched around the globe, but Ukraine tracking it especially closely, waiting to see how the outcome could impact ongoing U.S. support in its conflict with Russia. The U.S. has supplied Ukraine with more than $60 billion in military assistance since Russia invaded in 2022.
Vice President Harris vowing to keep supporting Ukraine's defense. Former President Trump says he's not going to keep the aid coming and can end the war if elected. Russia now occupies about 20% of Ukraine.
Community members speaking out about the closure of a city pool. We'll hear their concerns up next.